The Velith Harmony moved through deep space like a silver needle sliding through black cloth. It was a beautiful ship. The Aethari had built it 300 years ago, and they had built it to last. Its hull was smooth and white, covered in golden lines that carried energy from one end to the other. Inside, the air smelled like flowers that did not grow on Earth. The lights were soft and blue. Everything about the ship said the same thing. We are old, we are wise, and we are in control. Ambassador Sereth Quillan stood at the center of the bridge. He was tall and thin, with a body made of hard plates that looked like dark glass. His eyes were large and golden, and they moved slowly, the way the eyes of someone who has lived for 600 years tend to move. He had seen empires rise. He had watched stars die. Very little surprised him anymore. The Aethari Concord had ruled the Orion Arm for 12,000 years. 7 elder species, each one ancient, each one powerful, had come together long ago and decided that order was better than war. They mapped the stars, they wrote the laws, they decided who could travel, who could trade, and who could fight. And for 12,000 years, it had worked. Then, the humans showed up. Quillan did not dislike humans. That would have been like disliking rain. Rain was not dangerous. Rain was simply wet. Humans were simply young. They had only been in space for 200 years. They were loud. They were curious. They asked too many questions and never seemed satisfied with the answers. The Concord had given them observer status, which meant they could watch, listen, and attend meetings, but they could not vote. They could not command. They were guests at a table that had been set long before they were born. Commander Idris Okafor was the human assigned to the Velith Harmony. He was a military man, broad in the shoulders and calm in the eyes. He wore a dark blue uniform with a small earth patch on the sleeve. He rarely spoke during meetings, and when he did, his words were short and carefully chosen. Most of the crew ignored him. Quillan found him polite, but unnecessary. On this particular night, the ship was quiet. Most of the crew was resting. Quillan was reviewing trade reports in his quarters when the alarm sounded. It was not the loud alarm that meant danger. It was the soft alarm that meant something strange. Quillan walked to the bridge and found the communications officer already working at her station. She was a young Telvari, her feathered neck stiff with worry. "Ambassador," she said, "we have received a distress signal." "From where?" "The Ref Expanse, Sector 91. Quillan's golden eyes narrowed. The Ref Expanse was empty. Or at least, it was supposed to be empty. "Play it," he said. The bridge filled with sound. At first, it was just noise, static and hissing. Then, voices came through. They were screaming. Quillan heard words in the Concord's common language, words like breach, and they're coming through, and seal the doors. Then there was a sound like metal tearing, and the voices stopped. The signal repeated on a loop. Quillan stood very still for a long time. "That signal is coming from a Concord frequency," the communications officer said. "A research station. But Ambassador, there is no authorized station in Sector 91. Quillan knew what that meant. Someone in the Concord had built a secret outpost, and whatever they had been doing there had gone very wrong. He called a meeting. The senior officers gathered around the long table in the briefing room. Commander Okafor stood near the back, as he always did. He suggested sending a long-range probe first to gather information before committing the ship to a potentially dangerous region. Okafor stepped forward. "Ambassador, with respect, that signal has people on it. Living people who are dying right now. A probe will take days to reach them. We should go immediately." Quillan looked at him the way one might look at a child who had said something sweet but foolish. "Commander, we do not know what is happening in that sector. We do not know if the threat is contained. We do not know if going there would put this ship and its crew at risk. The correct approach is caution. People are dying, Okafor said again, quieter this time. And more people will die if we rush into something we do not understand, Quillan replied. You are an observer, Commander. You may observe, but you do not get a vote on this bridge. The room was silent. Okafor looked at Quillan for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and stepped back. The meeting ended. Quillan gave the order to prepare the probe. The officers returned to their stations. Everything moved forward according to plan. But Okafor did not go back to his quarters. He walked through the lower corridors of the Velith Harmony until he reached a small room near the back of the ship. It was a storage closet, mostly forgotten. Inside, hidden behind a panel he had loosened on his first day aboard, was a device no bigger than his hand. It was a narrowband transmitter, built to send a signal so tight and so fast that no standard sensor would catch it. It operated on a frequency that did not exist in any Concord database. Okafor turned it on. He typed a single word, lighthouse. He sent the message. Then he put the device away, replaced the panel, and walked back to his quarters as if nothing had happened. The Velith Harmony changed course toward the Reth Expanse. The probe was launched ahead of them. Quillan retired to his chambers, satisfied that he had made the right decision. On the other side of the galaxy, far beyond the Concord's borders, the message arrived at a place called Sol Anchorage. It was a space station orbiting high above Earth. From the outside, it looked like a simple communication relay, small, quiet, and unimportant. It was none of those things. The message passed through 7 layers of encryption and landed on a screen inside a room that very few people knew existed. A woman sat behind that screen. She was in her 60s, with short gray hair and eyes that looked like they had been cut from stone. Her name was Fleet Admiral Yuna Tanaka, and she was the highest-ranking officer in the United Terran Naval Command. She read the single word on the screen. She read it again. Then she picked up a communicator and spoke clearly. This is Tanaka. Authorization code Prometheus 7. Wake them all up. Across the dark side of Earth's moon, across stations hidden in asteroid belts, across shipyards buried deep inside planets that the Concorde had never bothered to visit, lights began to turn on. Engines that had been sleeping for years began to hum. Thousands of men and women in dark blue uniforms dropped what they were doing and ran to their stations. The humans had been quiet for a very long time. The Reth Expanse was supposed to be empty. That was the first lie. When the Velith Harmony dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the crew expected silence. They expected dark space and distant stars and nothing in between. Instead, they found a graveyard. Pieces of metal floated everywhere. Some were small enough to hold in a hand. Others were large enough to land a shuttle on. They turned slowly in the black, catching the light of a dying star and throwing it back in broken flashes. Here and there, frozen bodies drifted among the wreckage, their limbs stiff and their faces locked in expressions that no one on the bridge wanted to look at for too long. Ambassador Quillan stood at the front of the bridge, his golden eyes moving across the viewport. His hands, usually still, were trembling at his sides. Behind him, the crew worked in near silence. The only sound was the soft beeping of the scanners, as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. The outpost, Quillan said. Find it. The navigation officer pointed to a shape on the main screen. It had once been a station, a large one, with rings and towers and docking arms. Now it was a burned shell. Fires still glowed inside its broken sections, feeding on the last pockets of oxygen. The station's reactor was cracked open like an egg, leaking energy into space in slow, poisonous waves. And behind it, hanging in space like a wound that would not heal, was the rift. It was not a natural thing. Quillan could feel that just by looking at it. It was a tear in the fabric of space itself, roughly round and wider than the station had been. Its edges flickered with light that was not quite light. The color was wrong. It shifted between purple and black, and something that had no name. Looking at it made the eyes ache and the stomach turn. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. "What is that?" the communications officer whispered. No one answered. Commander Okafor stood at the back of the bridge, watching. He said nothing. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight, and his hands were clasped behind his back, so hard that his knuckles had gone white. The scanners found life signs among the wreckage. Not many, a few dozen people, trapped in a sealed section of the station that had not yet lost pressure. Quilon ordered a rescue team immediately. They brought back 31 survivors. Most were injured. Some were in shock and could not speak. They stared at the walls of the medical bay with empty eyes and flinched at every sound. But one of them could talk. Her name was Dr. Vela Norath. She was a Concord xenobiologist, a short creature with pale blue skin and 4 arms, 2 of which were wrapped in bandages. Her voice was hoarse, and her eyes kept darting to the door as if something might walk through it at any moment. Quilon sat across from her in the medical bay. Okafor stood nearby, listening. "Tell me what happened here," Quilon said gently. Norath swallowed hard. The project was called Deep Mirror. The Senate authorized it in secret. Only a few members knew. We were studying dark energy, trying to fold space, to open doorways between distant points. The military applications alone would have changed everything. "Dark energy manipulation is forbidden by Concord law," Quilon said. "Yes," Norath said. "It is." She paused, her 4 hands twisted together in her lap. 3 days ago, we succeeded. We opened a doorway, but it did not lead to another point in our space. It led somewhere else, somewhere old, somewhere that had been sealed shut a very long time ago. "Sealed by whom?" Quilon asked. "Some civilization that existed before the Concord, before anyone. They built a barrier across that region of space, and they locked it, and we broke the lock." Her voice cracked. She looked down at her hands. "They came through almost immediately, black ships, organic, living things but shaped like weapons. They tore through our defenses in minutes. We had 12 armed patrol ships. They lasted less than 90 seconds. "Who are they?" Okafor asked from the corner. Norath looked at him. "The records we found, the ones left by whoever built the barrier, they called them the Kreth Val. They are old, older than the Concord, older than any species we know. They consume, that is all they do. They move from place to place, and they consume everything: energy, matter, life. The civilization that sealed them away did it because they could not be reasoned with. They could not be stopped. They could only be contained. And what is coming through that rift is not a raiding party, Ambassador. It is a migration fleet. Our sensors, before they were destroyed, detected movement on the other side. Billions of them. They are massing. They are coming." The medical bay was very quiet. Quilon stood up. He walked to the bridge without speaking. He opened a channel to the Concord High Senate, the governing body of all 7 elder species. He told them everything. The response was immediate, and it was exactly what he feared. Panic. The Yindri delegate demanded that all fleets be recalled to protect Yindri space. The Telvari representative called for an emergency quarantine of the entire Reth sector. The Sorvine ambassador accused the Ithari of starting the crisis and threatened to withdraw from the Concord entirely. Within an hour, 3 of the 7 species had ordered their military ships to return home. The alliance was cracking, like thin ice, under heavy boots. Quilon tried to hold them together. He spoke of unity. He spoke of shared responsibility. He reminded them of 12,000 years of cooperation. But fear was louder than history, and one by one, the Allied fleets began to pull away. Okafor watched all of this from his usual spot at the back of the bridge. When the last angry transmission had ended and the bridge was quiet again, he checked the small device in his pocket. There was a reply waiting on the Terran frequency. 2 words. Fleet rising. He put the device away. Quilon turned and saw him standing there. The ambassador's golden eyes were tired and old, and full of something that might have been shame. "You sent a message," Quilon said. It was not a question. "Yes," Okafor said. "To your people." "Yes." "What did you tell them?" "That you needed help." "We did not ask for your help." Okafor looked back at the viewport, at the rift pulsing in the darkness, at the wreckage of a station that should never have existed, and at the empty space where Allied ships had been only hours ago. "You should have," he said. As if answering him, the rift pulsed again, wider this time. The scanners screamed. New contacts appeared on the edge of the screen, hundreds of them, pouring through the tear like black blood from a wound. The Krethval vanguard had arrived. They came in a swarm. The ships were dark and wet-looking, covered in ridges and spines, shaped like things that lived at the bottom of oceans on worlds where the sun never reached. They moved fast, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. And they moved together with a coordination that was not mechanical, but alive. The Concorde had left behind a small patrol, 6 ships that had not yet received orders to retreat. They turned to face the swarm. They fired everything they had. It was not enough. It was not close to enough. The vanguard swept through the patrol like fire through paper. 6 ships, gone in seconds. No debris, no escape pods. The Krethval did not leave wreckage. They consumed it. The bridge of the Velith Harmony was silent. Every officer stared at the screen. Quillen gripped the railing in front of him until his plates cracked. The vanguard did not slow down. It turned toward the populated systems of the Orion Arm and began to move. Somewhere far away, across the cold distance of space, engines roared and weapons loaded, and 800 ships began to move as one. But the Velith Harmony did not know that yet. All they knew was that the darkness was coming, and the galaxy's oldest alliance had just fallen apart in a single afternoon. The retreat was ugly. The Concorde's remaining ships fell back system by system, running from the Krethval vanguard like animals running from a wildfire. There was no strategy. There was no coordination. Each species commanded its own ships, and each species had its own idea about where to run. The Yindri went north toward their home clusters. The Telvari scattered east. The Sorvine simply vanished, their stealth ships disappearing into the dark between stars. Ambassador Quillan stood on the bridge of the Velith Harmony and watched 12,000 years of unity break apart on his screen. He had spent his entire life serving the Concorde. He had believed, with every part of himself, that the Alliance was the greatest achievement in the history of intelligent life. Now he watched it die in real time, and there was nothing he could say that anyone wanted to hear. The vanguard kept coming. It had grown. More ships poured through the rift every hour, and the swarm spread across the Reth expanse like ink dropped in water. Wherever they went, they consumed. Asteroid stations, fuel depots, unmanned relay points, everything was taken. Not destroyed, taken. Absorbed into the swarm and turned into something else. Something darker. Quilon sent message after message to the High Senate. He begged for a unified response. He received arguments, accusations, and silence. Commander Okafor stayed out of the way. He attended no meetings. He made no suggestions. He simply stood at his station and watched the tactical display with eyes that gave nothing away. If anyone had paid attention to him, and no one did, They might have noticed that he was not worried, not afraid. He was waiting. On the third day of the retreat, something happened that no one expected. The Velith Harmony was moving through a region of space near the outer edge of the Reth Expanse. There was nothing here. No stations, no planets, no reason for anyone to be nearby. The navigation officer was plotting their next jump when every sensor on the ship went bright at the same time. "What is that?" Quillan said, stepping forward. The navigation officer's feathered hands moved across her controls, her eyes wide. "Gravitational disturbance, Ambassador. Massive. It is coming from ahead of us." "How massive?" She looked at him. "I have never seen readings this large." Then the space in front of them tore open. Not the ugly sick wound of the Krethval rift. This was something else entirely. The stars ahead seemed to bend inward, like light being pulled toward a drain. And then space folded and split along clean, straight lines, and ships began to pour through. They came in rows, perfect, straight, even rows, like soldiers on a parade ground. They came fast, dropping out of faster-than-light travel, with a flash of blue light that rippled across the darkness. And they kept coming. Destroyers came first, small, fast, and sharp-looking, their hulls painted dark gray with a single white stripe down the center. They spread out in groups of 4, taking positions with mechanical precision. Behind them came the cruisers, bigger and heavier, their weapons visible along their sides like teeth in a closed jaw. Behind the cruisers came the carriers, each one as large as a small city, their bellies full of fighter craft and bomber wings. And behind the carriers, moving slowly because the galaxy had never seen anything quite like them, came the dreadnoughts. There were 12 of them. Each one was 3 kilometers long. Their hulls were dark and thick and covered in armor plates that overlapped like the scales of something ancient and dangerous. Weapons bristled from every surface. Long fusion lances, missile batteries, point defense clusters. They moved with the slow confidence of creatures that had never needed to run from anything. Every ship bore the same symbol on its hull, a blue circle with a single white star, the flag of the United Terran Navy. The bridge of the Velith Harmony was completely silent. Every officer had stopped working. Every screen showed the same thing, row after row after row of human warships filling the space ahead like a wall. Quillan counted. He counted twice, because the first number could not possibly be correct. 814 ships. The Concord's intelligence reports said that humanity maintained a small self-defense fleet of approximately 40 vessels. Quillan had read those reports himself. He had used them as evidence that humans were not a threat, not ready for full membership, not worth worrying about. He had been wrong. He had been catastrophically, historically wrong. "Ambassador," the communications officer said, her voice barely a whisper. "We are receiving a transmission, all frequencies. It is coming from the lead dreadnought." "Play it," Quillan said. A woman's voice filled the bridge. It was calm. It was clear. It carried the kind of authority that does not come from rank, but from the absolute certainty that every word will be obeyed. "This is Fleet Admiral Yuna Tanaka of the United Terran Naval Command. We have monitored the situation in the Reth Expanse. We are aware of the Krethval incursion. We are here." She paused. "To any Concord vessels in this sector, you are welcome to stay or go as you choose. We will not ask for your help. We will not judge you if you leave. But we are not leaving longer this time. To the Krethval, this space is claimed. You will advance no further. There will be no second warning." The transmission ended. Quillan turned slowly and looked at Commander Okafor. The human had not moved from his station. His face was still calm. His hands were still clasped behind his back. But there was something in his eyes now. Something quiet and fierce, like a fire that had been burning for a very long time behind a closed door. "How?" Quillan said. His voice was dry. "How is this possible?" Okafor met his gaze. "You gave us observer status, Ambassador. You told us to sit in the corner and watch. You told us we were not ready. And then you stopped paying attention to us." He looked out the viewport at the fleet, his people, hanging in the darkness like a promise kept. "You never once asked what we were building while we were being quiet." Before Quillan could respond, the tactical display changed. The Krethvol Vanguard had detected the Terran fleet. The swarm shifted direction, turning toward the new arrivals with the mindless hunger that drove everything they did. Hundreds of black bioships surged forward, the same swarm that had erased the Concord Patrol in seconds. Aboard the lead dreadnought, the TNS Resolve, Admiral Tanaka sat in her command chair. She was a small woman, silver-haired, with a face that looked like it had been carved from something harder than bone. Around her, her bridge crew worked in focused silence. Every screen showed the approaching swarm. Every weapon system was online. Her flag captain looked at her. "Admiral, the Vanguard is within weapons range in 40 seconds. Tanaka nodded. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All wings," she said. "Weapons free." 814 ships opened fire at the same time. The darkness lit up. Fusion lances, long white beams of energy hot enough to melt through a moon, reached out from the dreadnoughts and cut through the Vanguard like blades through smoke. Missile swarms launched from the cruisers, each one smart enough to pick its own target and fast enough to catch anything that tried to run. The destroyers moved in wolf packs, surrounding clusters of bioships and tearing them apart from every direction at once. The Krethval Vanguard, which had destroyed a Concord patrol of 6 ships in less than 90 seconds, fought back. They were fast. They were savage. Their weapons were strange and organic, firing bolts of energy that twisted through space in curves. It did not matter. The humans fought as one. Every ship knew where every other ship was. Their formations shifted and adapted in real time, flowing around threats and closing gaps before they could form. When one ship was hit, 2 more moved in to cover it. When a section of the swarm tried to flank, a destroyer wolf pack was already there, waiting. 11 minutes, that was all it took. 11 minutes, and the Vanguard that had terrorized the most powerful alliance in galactic history was gone. Not retreating, gone. Destroyed so completely that there was nothing left but dust and fading energy. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Quillan had ever heard. On every Concord communication channel, across every frequency used by every species in the Orion Arm, no one spoke, no one moved. The galaxy held its breath and stared at what the humans had done. Aboard the Velith Harmony, Quillan sank into his chair. His plates made a clicking sound that among Aethari meant something close to shock. Aboard the TNS Resolve, Tanaka was already looking past the wreckage. Her eyes were on the rift, still pulsing in the distance, still pouring darkness into the galaxy. "That was the small one," she said to no one in particular. "The real fleet hasn't come through yet." She straightened in her chair. "So we better be ready when it does." Admiral Tanaka did not celebrate the victory. She did not allow her crew to celebrate either. There would be time for that later, she told them, or there would not be time for anything at all. She set up a defensive perimeter around the rift. The dreadnoughts formed the center, their heavy weapons aimed at the Terran space like cannons aimed at a gate. The cruisers spread out on the flanks. The destroyers patrolled in wide circles, their sensors sweeping for any sign of movement. The carriers held back, their fighters ready to launch at a moment's notice. Then she did something that no one expected. She opened her tactical network to every Concord vessel in the sector. "This is Admiral Tanaka. I am transmitting our shield frequencies, our weapons data, our formation protocols, and our sensor calibrations on an open channel. Any Concord ship that wishes to integrate with our battle network is welcome to do so." There are no conditions. There are no strings. Take it and use it. The data streamed out across space, terabytes of military intelligence that humanity had spent 2 centuries developing in secret. Shield harmonics that the Concorde had never seen. Weapon systems that did not exist in any database. Tactical algorithms built by minds that had grown up studying every war humanity had ever fought, from ancient cavalry charges to nuclear standoffs. Aboard the Velith Harmony, Quillen stared at the incoming data on his screen. He did not understand all of it. He was a diplomat, not a soldier. But he understood enough to know what it meant. The humans were giving away their greatest secrets, freely, in the middle of a war, to species that had spent 2 centuries treating them like children. He found Commander Okafor in the corridor outside the bridge. The human was standing by a viewport, looking out at the rift. "Why?" Quillen asked. "Your people spent 200 years building those weapons in secret. Why give them away now?" Okafor did not turn from the viewport. "Because they are useless if we are the only ones left alive to use them." "But the advantage, the strategic value." "Ambassador." Okafor looked at him. His dark eyes were steady. "We do not hoard survival. That is not how our species made it this far. We did not cross oceans by building one boat. We did not survive winters by keeping one fire. When things get bad enough, we share everything we have, and we fight together. That is what humans do." Quillen said nothing for a long time. Then he returned to the bridge and opened a channel to every Concorde fleet commander who was still listening. "This is Ambassador Quillen of the Aethari Concorde. I will not beg. I will not argue. I will simply tell you what I have seen. The humans came, they fought, they won, and then they opened their hands and gave us everything they had. They did not ask for payment. They did not ask for power. They asked for nothing." He paused. "If we cannot match that, then we deserve whatever comes through that rift." He closed the channel and waited. The first ship to return was a Telvari scout. It was small and old, and its weapons were weak, but it came back. It flew into the Terran formation and linked up with the battle network. An hour later, a Yindri battle group appeared. 6 heavy cruisers with their weapons hot and their shields up. Then a Sorvine stealth wing. Then a Dreth carrier. Then more and more. They came back, not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. They came back because Quillen had asked them to, and because the humans had shown them what courage looked like. The combined fleet formed up. It was not pretty. The ships were different sizes and shapes, and they did not move the same way. But the Terran battle network tied them together, feeding each ship the information it needed to fight as part of something bigger than itself. For the first time in the history of the galaxy, every spacefaring species was linked to the same tactical system, fighting as one force. Then the rift opened wide. It happened all at once. The pulsing Terran space, which had been slowly growing for days, suddenly expanded like a mouth opening to scream. The edges flared with that sick nameless color, and through the gap came the Krethval migration fleet. The vanguard had been hundreds of ships. This was thousands. They poured through the rift in a wave that seemed to have no end. Each ship was enormous, bioships the size of cities, their dark hulls covered in ridges and spines and openings that glowed with stolen energy. They moved together, like a single living thing, a tide of darkness rolling across space. Behind them, visible through the rift for just a moment before the view was swallowed by the swarm, were more, millions more, an entire civilization on the move, hungry and unstoppable, looking for a new galaxy to consume. "All ships," Tanaka said. Her voice was iron. "Hold the line." The Battle of the Reth Expanse began at what the humans called 1800 hours. It did not end for 19 hours. The first wave hit the perimeter like a hammer hitting glass. The dreadnoughts fired their fusion lances in continuous beams, carving burning lines through the swarm. The cruisers launched everything they had. The destroyers dove into the gaps between bioships and fought at close range, their hulls scraping against organic armor as they fired point-blank into soft spots. The Concorde ships fought beside them. The Yindri cruisers used their plasma batteries to create walls of fire that the swarm had to push through. The Telvari scouts darted ahead, marking targets for the heavy guns. The Sorvine stealth ships appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and vanished again. But the Krethval kept coming. For every bioship that was destroyed, 10 more took its place. The swarm adapted. It learned. Ships that had fallen for the same trick twice changed their approach the third time. Weapons that had been effective in the first hour became useless by the fifth. The losses were terrible. The Terran destroyer TNS Sparrow was swarmed by 6 bioships and torn apart. The Yindri cruiser Flame of Dawn took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded, taking 2 bioships with it. Dozens of ships were damaged, crippled, or destroyed as the hours crawled by. Captain Alexei Petrov commanded the TNS Achilles, a dreadnought that had been holding the center of the formation for 12 hours straight. Its armor was cracked. Its forward weapons were gone. Half its crew was dead or wounded. But Petrov would not retreat. At the 15th hour, the rift pulsed again. A new wave, the largest yet, began to push through. Tanaka looked at her tactical display and saw the math. The combined fleet was holding, but barely. If this new wave reached the line at full strength, it would break through. Petrov saw it too. He did not ask for permission. He turned the Achilles toward the rift and pushed the engines to full. The crippled dreadnought, trailing fire and bleeding atmosphere from a dozen breaches in its hull, flew straight into the heart of the swarm. Bioships closed in around it from every side. Petrov did not fire. He did not slow down. He aimed for the rift itself. The Achilles hit the edge of the rift at full speed. The moment it crossed the threshold, Petrov detonated the reactor. The explosion was enormous. It was not enough to close the rift, but it collapsed the edges inward, narrowing the opening to a fraction of its former size. The flood of reinforcements slowed to a trickle. The new wave, cut off from the bulk of the migration fleet, was suddenly alone and outnumbered. The combined fleet tore it apart. By the 19th hour, the battle was over. The space around the rift was filled with the shattered remains of thousands of bioships. The combined fleet had paid dearly. Nearly 200 ships destroyed, thousands of lives lost. The Terran Navy had taken the worst of it. They had held the center through the entire battle, absorbing blow after blow so that the Concorde ships on the flanks could survive. Tanaka sat in her command chair aboard the Resolve. She had not slept. She had not eaten. Her uniform was stained with coffee and blood from a cut on her forehead that she had refused to let the medic treat. She looked at the rift. It was smaller now, thanks to Petrov's sacrifice, but it was still there, still pulsing, still open. "It will grow back," Dr. Norath said. She had come to the Resolve during the battle, offering her expertise on the rift's behavior. The spatial fabric wants to tear. The damage the original experiment did, it created a weakness. The rift will expand again, maybe in days, maybe in weeks, but it will come back, and they will come through again. Tanaka stared at the rift for a long time. "Then we close it," she said. "Permanently." "That is not possible," Norath said. "The energy required." "It is possible," Tanaka said. "We built something, a long time ago, just in case." She opened a secure channel to Sol anchorage and spoke a single word. The ship that carried Prometheus was the most ordinary-looking vessel in the galaxy. It was a standard Terran transport, boxy, gray, unarmed, and slow. It looked like the kind of ship that delivered food to mining stations. It had no name painted on its hull. It had no weapons. It had a crew of 4. It arrived at the Wreath Expanse 6 days after the battle. It flew through the field of wreckage and drifting bioship remains without stopping, guided by a Terran escort that kept a respectful distance. When it reached the TNS Resolve, it docked quietly, and a team of engineers carried its cargo aboard the flagship in a sealed container the size of a coffin. Admiral Tanaka gathered her senior officers and the remaining Concord commanders in the Resolve's briefing room. Commander Okafor stood to her left. Ambassador Quilon stood to her right. The room was full of officers from a dozen different species, all of them battered and exhausted, and held together by nothing more than the shared memory of what they had survived. Tanaka explained what Prometheus was. 20 years ago, she said, our scientists began studying dark energy manipulation. Yes, the same science that the Concord banned. The same science that created the rift. She held up a hand before anyone could speak. We did not do it to build weapons. We did it because we knew that if anyone else ever tore a hole in space, someone would need to be able to close it. She pointed to the sealed container on the table. This is a dark energy implosion device. When detonated at the center of a spatial rift, it reverses the energy flow. Instead of tearing space apart, it pulls it back together. The rift collapses permanently. The barrier that the ancient civilization built, the one the Concord's experiment broke, will reform, and the Krethval will be sealed away again. The room was quiet. There is a problem, Tanaka continued. The gravitational tides inside the rift are extreme and constantly shifting. No autopilot system can navigate them. The device must be flown to the exact center of the rift and detonated manually. The pilot will have approximately 4 seconds between detonation and collapse. That is not enough time to escape. She paused. It is a one-way trip. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against the chest. Officers looked at each other. Some looked at the floor. Everyone understood what she was saying. Tanaka straightened. I will fly the transport myself. I will transfer fleet command to... No. The voice came from the back of the room. It was quiet, but it carried the weight of 600 years. Every head turned. Ambassador Quilon stepped forward. His dark glass plates caught the light of the room, and his golden eyes were clear and steady in a way they had not been since the beginning of this disaster. No, Admiral, he said again. You will not. Tanaka looked at him. Ambassador, with respect, this is not a military decision, Quilon said. He walked to the front of the room and stood beside the container. His 4-fingered hand rested on its surface. This rift exists because my people's arrogance created it. The Concord authorized the experiment. The Concord built the station. The Concord broke the barrier. Every death in this war, every ship lost, every life taken, began with a decision made by the species I represent. He looked around the room, at the Telvari officers, at the Yindri commanders, at the human faces that watched him with expressions he could not quite read. You came to save us, he said, looking at Tanaka. You built a fleet in secret, not to conquer us, but to protect us. You shared your technology without conditions. You held the line while we ran, and now you want to die for our mistake. His voice was steady, but something in it cracked, just slightly, like old wood bending under weight. I will not allow it. A human should not die for this. Let me do one worthy thing with the years I have left. The room was silent for a very long time. Tanaka studied him. Her stone-gray eyes searched his face for doubt, for fear, for any sign that this was impulse rather than conviction. She found none. Are you certain? She asked. I have been alive for 600 years, Admiral. I have attended 10,000 meetings. I have signed 100,000 documents. None of it mattered as much as this moment. Tanaka held his gaze. Then she nodded. The preparation took 3 hours. The transport was loaded with Prometheus and checked twice by the Terran engineering team. Quilon spent the time in his quarters, recording messages for the Concord Senate that he knew he would never deliver in person. Okafor came to see him before the flight. They stood in the corridor outside the docking bay. The transport waited behind them, small and gray and impossibly important. "Thank you," Okafor said, "for what it is worth." Quilon made a sound that among Aethari was a kind of laugh. "I spent 2 centuries thinking your species was not ready for the galaxy. I think perhaps it was the galaxy that was not ready for you." Okafor extended his hand. Quilon looked at it for a moment, then took it in his own thin fingers. They stood like that, the old alien and the young human, holding on to each other at the edge of the end. Then, Quilon boarded the transport, and the docking bay doors closed. The combined fleet cleared a corridor to the rift. Every ship in the formation pulled back, creating a straight path from the Resolve to the Terran space. Along the edges, weapons remained hot. The Krethval were still trickling through, and the gunners picked them off one by one, keeping the path clear. Quilon flew the transport himself. His hands were steady on the controls. The small ship moved forward, alone, through the corridor of warships that lined its path. As it passed each vessel, the crew aboard saluted, some in the Concord way, some in the Terran way, some simply standing at their viewports and watching. The rift grew larger in the viewport. Its edges twisted and flickered with that wrong-colored light. Inside, Quilon could see the darkness on the other side, the place where the Krethval waited, endless and hungry. Gravitational tides pulled at the ship, trying to tear it apart. Quilon held the course. His communication system was still on. He knew the entire fleet could hear him. He spoke one last time. "I was wrong about your kind, Commander. About all of you. Your people do not fight because they love war. They fight because they love what war threatens to take from them. I understand that now." He paused. The rift was very close. The galaxy will not make the mistake of underestimating humanity again. The transport crossed the threshold. For a moment, the ship was visible inside the rift, a tiny point of light in a sea of darkness. Then Quilon pressed the switch. Prometheus detonated. The light was blinding. It was white and pure, and it spread outward from the center of the rift, like a second sun being born. The edges of the tear stopped flickering. They froze. Then they began to pull inward, slowly at first, then faster and faster, like water draining from a sink. Space folded back on itself, layer by layer, until the wound that had been torn open was closed, smoothed over, and sealed. The rift was gone. The barrier was restored. The Krethval were locked away again, this time forever. Where the rift had been, there was nothing, just stars, just space, just silence. Aboard the Resolve, Tanaka bowed her head. Across the fleet on ships from a dozen different species, crews stood in silence. Some wept, some prayed, some simply stared at the place where an old ambassador had traded 600 years of life for something that mattered more. 3 weeks later, the Concord High Senate convened on the Aethari homeworld. The chamber was full. Every species was represented. Every seat was taken. The room was quiet in a way that it had never been quiet before, because for the first time in 12,000 years, every delegate in the room knew that things were about to change. The Speaker of the Senate rose and read the resolution. Humanity was no longer an observer. Humanity was granted full and equal membership in the Aethari Concord. A permanent seat was created on the Security Council, and it was given to the Terran delegation. A new institution was proposed, a unified galactic defense fleet, drawing ships and officers from every member species, operating under shared command and shared doctrine. The Terran Navy's tactical systems would form its foundation. The vote was unanimous. Commander Idris Okafor, newly promoted to Admiral, walked to the podium. He wore his dark blue uniform, pressed and clean, with the Earth patch on his sleeve and a new silver star on his collar. He looked out at the chamber, at the faces of beings who had spent centuries looking down on this species, beings who now looked at him with something that was not quite fear and not quite admiration, but something in between. He spoke simply. "We came because you were in trouble," he said. "That is all it ever was." He stepped down. The chamber erupted, but Okafor barely heard it. He walked to the viewport at the edge of the room and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, on 100 different worlds, beings who had never thought twice about humanity were looking up at those same stars tonight. Merchants on Talvari trading stations, soldiers on Yindri warships, children on Sorvine colony worlds, all of them looking up. All of them thinking the same thing. What else had the humans been building in the dark? What else were they capable of? And for the first time in the long history of the galaxy, the answer to that question made the stars feel a little bit brighter.